They say horror is just a story until it starts feeling real. If you're hearing this, it's already too late to turn back. What you'll hear tonight might follow you into your dreams or your silence. Before sleep takes you and you forget, like and subscribe now. And tell me, have you ever been alone in an underground station late at night? I don't mean merely being the only person on a particular platform, but truly alone. No staff behind ticket barriers. No maintenance workers in high visibility vests. No other passengers waiting for the last train home. Just you, the humming fluorescent lights, and that peculiar silence that seems to amplify every small sound. The drip of water from somewhere unseen, the distant rumble that might be an approaching train, or might be something else entirely. The soft electrical buzz that permeates everything. It's an unsettling experience. The London Underground wasn't designed to be empty. These spaces were built for crowds, for movement, for the constant flow of humanity. When that element is removed, what remains feels wrong somehow, abandoned yet expectant, as if the station itself is waiting for something to happen. I never intended to find myself in such a situation. But then, the most terrifying experiences rarely come by invitation, do they? It was a Tuesday in late November, and I'd been working late at my firm's office near Liverpool Street. A client emergency, always a client emergency, had kept me hunched over spreadsheets until well past midnight. By the time I finally shut down my computer and gathered my things, the city had emptied of its daytime population, leaving only the occasional security guard or cleaner moving like ghosts through the glass and steel canyons. The rain had started sometime during my 9th consecutive hour at the desk. A cold, persistent drizzle that seemed designed specifically to penetrate clothing at the collar and cuffs. I pulled my coat tighter as I hurried toward Liverpool Street Station, hoping to catch the last Central Line train that would take me at least part of the way home to Ealing. The main concourse of Liverpool Street was eerily quiet. The shops were shuttered. The usual crowds replaced by a handful of dejected-looking travelers slouched on benches, victims of delayed or canceled trains. A solitary cleaner pushed a mop across the vast floor, the squeaking of his wheels echoing in the cavernous space. I checked the departure board. The last Central Line train was due in 12 minutes. Enough time to descend to the underground level and position myself on the westbound platform. The escalators were still running, carrying me downward into the familiar warmth of the underground. It always feels several degrees warmer below street level, regardless of the season. A combination of trapped body heat, train mechanics, and the simple fact that you're closer to the Earth's core. Usually, I find that warmth comforting after the chill of a London night. But on this particular evening, it felt oppressive, almost feverish. The ticket barrier stood open, unmanned at this late hour. I swiped my Oyster card out of habit and proceeded toward the Central Line platforms. The usually bustling corridors were deserted, my footsteps echoing off the tile walls. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the rumble of a train, not mine, presumably one of the night tube services on another line. As I rounded the final corner to the Central Line platforms, I was struck by an odd sensation, a heaviness in the air, as if the atmospheric pressure had suddenly increased. My ears popped painfully, and for a moment, I felt disoriented, unsure which direction I was facing. The sensation passed as quickly as it had come. I emerged onto the westbound platform and glanced at the electronic display. 8 minutes until the train. I was the only person waiting. I found a bench and sat down, suddenly aware how exhausted I was after the long day. The platform lights seemed to flicker slightly, or perhaps it was just my tired eyes struggling to maintain focus. The air felt unusually still, lacking the subtle movement that typically precedes an approaching train. It was then that I noticed the rain, not the rain above ground that I'd walked through to reach the station, but actual raindrops falling onto platform floor several feet away from where I sat. I stared in confusion. There was no obvious source, no leaking pipe visible on the curved ceiling, no wet commuters shaking off umbrellas, just a small, steady patter of drops hitting the concrete floor, forming a growing puddle. I looked up at the electronic display again. 7 minutes to go. I considered moving to a different spot on the platform, but found myself oddly reluctant to approach the mysterious rainfall. Instead, I pulled out my phone, thinking to distract myself with emails or social media. No signal. Of course, this particular stretch of the Central Line was a notorious dead zone. I put the phone away and returned my attention to the platform. The puddle had grown larger in just those few moments, spreading across the concrete in a way that seemed to defy the slight slope of the floor. Water should have run toward the tracks, but this puddle was expanding in all directions equally, including up the gentle incline toward where I sat. That was when I noticed the silence. The background hum of the station, the distant rumble of trains, the electrical buzz of the lights, the faint whoosh of air through the ventilation system, all of it had ceased. The only sound was the gentle patter of those raindrops, hitting the growing puddle with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. I checked the electronic display again, suddenly desperate for reassurance that normal underground service was still in operation. The screen was blank. Something was very wrong. I stood up, intending to return to the main concourse and find a staff member, or failing that, to leave the station entirely and find a night bus or taxi. But as I took a step away from the bench, the lights flickered again, more pronounced this time. For perhaps half a second, the platform was plunged into complete darkness. When the lights came back on, I was no longer alone on the platform. A figure stood beside the expanding puddle. A man, or at least something with the general shape of a man. He was facing away from me, toward the tunnel from which the train would eventually emerge. He was dressed in what appeared to be an old-fashioned underground uniform, the kind I'd seen in historical photographs from the early days of the tube. But the uniform was soaking wet, water dripping constantly from the sodden fabric to join the puddle at his feet. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sounding muffled in the strange silence. "Do you work here? Is there a problem with the train?" The figure didn't respond or turn around. Water continued to stream from his clothing, the puddle now extending halfway across the platform width. I took a cautious step backward. Something about the figure's absolute stillness was deeply unsettling. No shifting of weight from foot to foot, no slight movement of the head, not even a rise and fall of breathing. Just perfect, unnatural stillness, broken only by the constant flow of water from the saturated uniform. "I think I'll head back upstairs," I said, more to break the silence than with any expectation of response. "Can you tell me if there are any staff members around?" Slowly, with a movement so fluid it seemed almost like a film running in reverse, the figure began to turn toward me. There was something wrong with the motion. Too smooth, lacking the natural hitch and pause of human joints and muscles. I found myself backing away before he had even completed the turn. Some primal instinct warning me that I did not want to see his face. I was right. The figure now faced me fully, and I could see that what I had taken for a man was nothing of the sort. The uniform was authentic enough, down to the tarnished brass buttons and faded insignia. But the body wearing it was wrong in ways my mind struggled to process. It was too tall, too thin, proportions subtly but unmistakably inhuman. And the face, where a face should have been, was only smooth, blank skin, interrupted by what appeared to be a series of gills running along where the cheeks would be. These gills pulsed rhythmically, opening and closing to reveal glimpses of dark red tissue within. Water seeped continuously from these openings, running down the uniform in rivulets. I backed away further, my shoulder blades pressing against the tiled wall of the platform. The creature, for I could no longer think of it as a man, took a single step toward me. The movement had that same unnatural fluidity, as if it were moving through water rather than air. "What are you?" I whispered, the question escaping me before I could consider the wisdom of engaging with the thing. The gill-like structures pulsed more rapidly, and a sound emerged, not from a mouth, which the creature lacked, but seemingly from the gills themselves. A wet, bubbling voice that nonetheless formed recognizable words. "Last train," it said, the consonants distorted by the liquid nature of its speech. "Must clear the platform. Last train approaching." Despite the mundane content of the words, something about the way it spoke filled me with profound dread. There was an undertone to its voice, a subtle wrongness that suggested the creature was merely approximating human speech, like a predatory fish mimicking the movements of a less threatening species. "I'll go," I said quickly, edging sideways along the wall toward the exit. "I'll wait upstairs." The creature moved again, positioning itself between me and the corridor that led back to the escalators. Water continued to pour from its uniform, the puddle now covering most of the platform floor and lapping at the toes of my shoes. "Cannot leave," it bubbled. "Must wait for last train. All passengers must board." "There is no train," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear claw at my throat. "The display is blank. Service has ended for the night." The creature's head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly touching its shoulder, without any corresponding movement of its neck. "Display is incorrect. Last train approaches. Listen." And indeed, I could now hear something, a distant rumble growing steadily louder. But it didn't sound like any tube train I'd ever heard. The pitch was wrong, too deep, more like the growl of some vast marine predator than the mechanical rattle of an approaching central line service. "That's not a train," I said, as much to convince myself as to contradict the creature. "What is that? What's coming?" The gill slits pulsed more rapidly, and I had the distinct impression that if the creature had possessed a mouth, it would have been smiling. "Last train," it repeated. "Special service. Comes only when the tunnels flood. Comes only for the final journey." The rumble was growing louder, and now I could feel vibrations through the soles of my shoes. But there was something else accompanying the sound, a rushing, gurgling noise that reminded me of a bath emptying when the plug is pulled. To my horror, I saw that the water level on the platform was rising rapidly now, no longer a mere puddle but a shallow flood that had reached my ankles and was climbing higher. And it was cold, a bone-deep, penetrating cold that seemed to leach the warmth from my body with an almost deliberate malevolence. "What's happening?" I gasped, the icy water now midway up my calves. "Make it stop." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, a wet, bubbling chuckle that sent fresh waves of terror through me. "Cannot stop the flood. The old rivers remember their paths. The buried streams rise again. The Fleet, the Tyburn, the Westbourne, they flow beneath your feet every day, contained but not conquered, and sometimes they break free." I had no idea what it was talking about. London's buried rivers were at best a vague concept to me, something mentioned in guidebooks or history documentaries. but the water was undeniably real, now reaching my knees and still rising rapidly. The rumbling had become a roar, drowning out even the strange, bubbling speech of the creature. The water churned around my legs, tugging at me with unexpected strength, as it tried to pull me toward the platform edge. And then I saw it. Emerging from the tunnel not with the familiar headlights of a tube train, but as a solid wall of churning, debris-filled water, a flash flood racing through the tunnel with devastating force, picking up speed as it approached the platform. "Last train arrives," the creature said, its voice somehow audible over the roar of the oncoming deluge. "All passengers must board." With a sudden lunge that belied its previous fluid movements, the creature's elongated arm shot out, wrapping around my waist with horrifying strength. I screamed and struggled, but it was like fighting against steel cables. The creature began dragging me toward the platform edge, toward the approaching wall of water that would surely kill me on impact if the creature didn't drown me first. "No!" I shouted, clawing desperately at the tiled walls, seeking any handhold. "Let me go. This isn't a train. This is a flood." "Yes!" the creature agreed, continuing to pull me inexorably toward the edge. Flood, train, vehicle of transition, passage to the depths, all the same to those below. My feet were sliding helplessly through the now thigh-deep water on the platform. The roar of the approaching flood was deafening, the air pressure dropping precipitously as thousands of gallons of water displaced the atmosphere in confined space of the tunnel. In desperation, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my Oyster card, the only object I could lay hands on. With all my strength, I jammed the hard plastic edge into one of the creature's pulsing gill slits. The effect was instantaneous and unexpected. The creature released me with a high-pitched, keening wail that sounded like metal grinding against metal. It recoiled, hands clutching at the injured gill, water pouring from the wound in a torrent that seemed far greater than could be contained in a body of its size. I didn't wait to see more. Free of its grip, I fought my way through the rising water toward the corridor that led to the escalators. The flood from the tunnel was seconds away from hitting the platform. I could feel its approach as a pressure wave in the air, could see the leading edge of churning water about to burst from the tunnel mouth. I reached the corridor just as the flood hit the platform behind me. The impact was like a bomb detonating, the concussive force throwing me forward onto the steps of the stop escalator. Cold water surged around me, trying to drag me back toward the platform, but I clutched the metal treads and pulled myself upward, fighting against the current with every ounce of strength I possessed. Behind me, I heard the creature's bubbling voice one last time, distorted by distance and the roar of water, but still horribly distinct. "Next station below." I crawled up the escalator, the water level dropping as I ascended, until I was finally able to stand and stagger the rest of the way to the ticket barriers. The main concourse was deserted, but blessedly dry. No staff, no passengers, not even the cleaner I'd seen earlier. Just empty space and blessed normality. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, but there was no sign of flooding, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. A night bus rumbled past, its upper deck empty save for a couple nodding off against a window. A taxi with its light on cruise slowly down the street. I flagged it down with shaking hands and gave the driver my address in Ealing. He gave me an odd look, understandable, given that I was soaking wet from the thighs down, my expensive work shoes squelching as I slid into the back seat. "Fell in a puddle, did you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd seen far stranger things during his years of night driving in London. "Something like that." I managed, teeth chattering from cold and residual fear, slipped near the station. He grunted acknowledgement and pulled away from the curb. As we drove, I stared out the window at the sleeping city, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I fallen asleep on the platform and dreamed the whole thing? Had I hallucinated from exhaustion? Or had I genuinely encountered something not of this world? Something that lurked in forgotten spaces beneath London streets? The next day, I called in sick to work. Not a lie, as I developed a fever and racking cough overnight. When I felt well enough to check the news a few days later, I searched for reports of flooding at Liverpool Street Station. Nothing. No service disruptions, no maintenance issues, not even a leaking pipe. According to every official source, nothing unusual had happened that night. But I knew, and in the weeks that followed, as I recovered from what the doctor diagnosed as severe pneumonia, I began to research London's buried rivers. The Fleet, the Tyburn, the Westbourne, just as the creature had named them. Ancient waterways that had been built over as the city expanded, forced underground into culverts and sewers, but never truly gone, still flowing beneath the streets, beneath the underground tunnels, following paths established thousands of years before the first human settlement. And the deeper I researched, the more I found whispered accounts similar to mine. Urban explorers who ventured into abandoned tube stations and never returned. Maintenance workers who refused to take shifts at certain stations during heavy rainfall. Old underground maps that showed stations where no station should be. Temporary stops along the buried rivers, accessible only when water levels reached a certain height. I never took the tube again after that night. I moved to a flat within walking distance of my office. Despite the exorbitant rent, on rainy days, I work from home, unwilling to venture underground while water flows freely above. Because I know now what lurks in those lower depths, in the forgotten tunnels where buried rivers sometimes break free of their man-made constraints. I know about the creatures that serve as conductors on trains that never appear on any official timetable, that collect passengers for journeys from which there is no return ticket. And sometimes, on particularly rainy nights, I wake to the sound of water dripping somewhere in my flat, not from a leaking pipe or poorly sealed window, but from nowhere and everywhere at once, a rhythmic patter that almost forms words if I listen too closely. Next station below, next station below. So if you find yourself alone on an underground platform late at night, and you notice water where no water should be, a puddle expanding against gravity, raindrops falling from a dry ceiling, don't wait to see what emerges from that impromptu spring. Don't wait to hear the rumble that might be an approaching train, but isn't. Don't wait for the last service of night, the special service that comes only when the tunnels flood. Run. Run back the way you came, up towards the street, up towards the open air and normal rain that falls from the sky rather than rising from below. Run before you meet the conductor with its gill-slit smile and soaking uniform. Before you're forced aboard a train bound for stations that appear on no map, destinations from which no traveler has ever filed a complaint about delayed service or overcrowded carriages. Because some tickets, once punched, cannot be refunded. Some journeys, once begun, cannot be aborted at the next stop. And some trains, once boarded, never reach the end of the line. Because there is no end, only an eternal passage through flooded tunnels, deeper and deeper into the darkness beneath the city. Next station below. I've been putting off telling this story for nearly 3 years now. I suppose the rhythmic patter of rain against my window tonight has finally given me the courage. Perhaps you're listening to this whilst the rain falls outside your home too. There's something about the rain that makes us feel safely cocooned away from the outside world, isn't there? though after what happened to me, I'm not certain anywhere is truly safe. It was meant to be a simple camping trip. Just 3 nights in Halewood Forest, a rather secluded woodland about 40 miles north of Manchester. I've been feeling overwhelmed with work and desperately needed to disconnect from the constant buzzing of my mobile and the glare of my laptop screen. Have you ever felt that urge to just disappear for a while? To breathe air that hasn't been recycled through office ventilation systems? I've been camping since I was a lad, so the prospect of spending a few days alone in the woods didn't faze me in the slightest. I packed light, just my 2-man tent, sleeping bag, camping stove, a few tins of food, my torch, and a paperback I'd been meaning to finish for months. I deliberately left my phone charger at home. The whole point was to disconnect. After all, the drive up was pleasant enough. It was early October, and the autumn colors were just beginning to emerge on the trees. The weather forecast had predicted light rain for the weekend, but nothing I couldn't handle. I camped in far worse conditions. I reached the forest car park around mid-afternoon. It was empty save for a single mud-splattered Land Rover, which I assumed belonged to the park ranger. The visitor center, a small wooden cabin that sold maps and basic supplies, was closed with a handwritten sign saying "Back Tuesday," taped to the door. It was Friday. Seems I've got the place to myself. I muttered, shouldering my rucksack. There was something both liberating and slightly unnerving about that prospect. I'd studied the forest map online before leaving home, so I had a decent idea of where I was headed. There was a small clearing about 2 miles in near a stream that was designated for camping. It would take me about an hour to reach it, which would give me plenty of time to set up camp before dusk. The path into the forest was well maintained at first, a wide dirt track flanked by towering oak and ash trees. The canopy above was dense enough that only dappled sunlight managed to break through, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. As I walked deeper, I noticed how the sounds of the distant road gradually faded, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and occasional birdsong. After about half an hour, the main path began to narrow, and the trees grew closer together. The forest felt older here, somehow more primal. The undergrowth was thicker, with brambles and ferns encroaching on the trail. I had to check my compass a few times to ensure I was still headed in the right direction. It was around this point that I first noticed the silence. You know how forests are supposed to be teeming with life? Birds calling, insects buzzing, the scurrying of small creatures in the undergrowth? Well, all of that had stopped. The silence was so abrupt and complete that I actually paused mid-step, my boot hovering above the ground. I held my breath and listened intently. Nothing, not even the wind in the trees. A shiver ran down my spine, though I quickly rationalized it. Perhaps a predator was nearby, a fox or a wildcat that had scared the smaller creatures into silence. That happens in nature all the time, doesn't it? I continued walking, though my pace quickened involuntarily. The clearing, when I finally found it, was smaller than I'd anticipated. Just a rough circle about 30 feet across, with a promised stream bubbling along its eastern edge. The ground was relatively flat and free from rocks, perfect for pitching a tent. I dropped my rucksack with a sigh of relief and took a moment to stretch my aching shoulders. That's when I noticed something odd. On the far side of the clearing, partially hidden by tall grass, was what appeared to be the remains of another campsite. A blackened circle of stones marked where a fire had been, and the grass was flattened in a rectangular shape that suggested a tent had stood there recently. What caught my attention, however, was the state of the site. It looked as though whoever had been camping there had left in a hurry. A cooking pot lay on its side near the fire pit. A torch, one of those heavy-duty metal ones, lay discarded in the grass. And strangest of all, a single walking boot stood upright, as if its owner had simply vanished while wearing the other. I approached cautiously, nudging the boot with my toe. It toppled over, revealing nothing unusual inside, just an abandoned boot. Perhaps its owner had suffered a blister and removed it, then forgotten it when packing up, but that didn't explain the cooking pot or the torch, both expensive items that no camper would willingly leave behind. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. "Anyone about?" No response, just that unnerving silence. I considered my options. The sensible thing would have been to hike back to my car and report the abandoned campsite to the ranger or the police. But it was already late afternoon, and I'd have to navigate the increasingly overgrown path in fading light. Besides, there was probably a perfectly reasonable explanation. Perhaps the camper had been collected by friends and had packed in a rush, accidentally leaving a few items behind. So I decided to stay. I pitched my tent on the opposite side of the clearing, as far from the abandoned campsite as possible. By the time I'd finished, the first drops of rain were beginning to fall, light at first, then steadily increasing until it became a constant patter against the canvas. I boiled some water on my camping stove and made myself a cup of tea, then opened a tin of beans which I heated and ate straight from a container. Simple camping food, but satisfying after the hike. As I ate, I watched the rain creating ripples in the stream and tried to ignore the nagging unease caused by the abandoned campsite. Night fell surprisingly quickly. One moment there was still a hint of gray light filtering through the trees, and the next it was pitch black beyond the small circle illuminated by my torch. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm. Not heavy enough to be concerning, but persistent enough that I knew I'd be spending the evening in my tent rather than sitting by a campfire as I'd planned. I crawled into my sleeping bag with my paperback, but found it difficult to concentrate on the words. The silence of the forest, which had been unsettling during daylight hours, was now broken only by the rain on the tent canvas and the occasional distant crack of a branch. Every sound made me tense, my ears straining for anything unusual. Would you have been able to read in those conditions? Or would your mind have been playing tricks on you too? I must have eventually drifted off, book still open on my chest, because the next thing I remember is waking with start. The rain had stopped, and the silence was absolute once more. My torch had switched off. Either the batteries had died, or I'd turned it off before falling asleep. The darkness inside the tent was complete. What had woken me? I lay perfectly still, listening. There, a sound, so faint I might have imagined it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I reached blindly for my torch, knocking it further away in my panic. The footsteps continued their slow circuit, leaves and twigs occasionally crunching underfoot. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly high-pitched with fear. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped abruptly, directly outside the entrance to my tent. I held my breath, eyes straining in the darkness, desperately willing them to adjust enough to see something, anything, through the thin fabric of the tent. And then a voice, so close it could have been inside the tent with me. "You're in my spot." The voice was male, I think, low and raspy, as if its owner hadn't spoken in a very long time, or as if something was wrong with their throat. I fumbled again for my torch, finally locating it and switching it on with trembling fingers. The beam was weak. The batteries were indeed dying, but provided enough light for me to see that I was alone in the tent. "I'm sorry," I replied, surprised that I could speak at all given how dry my mouth had become. I didn't realize this spot was taken. I saw the other campsite, but it looked abandoned. A long silence followed, so long that I began to wonder if I'd imagined a voice, perhaps incorporating the sound of the wind or a nocturnal animal into a half-dream. And then, not abandoned, never abandoned. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead and down my back. The hair on my arms stood on end. There was something profoundly wrong about that voice. It didn't sound entirely human. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Another long pause. I strained my ears but could hear nothing beyond the frantic beating of my own heart. "I am the forest," came the reply eventually, "and you are trespassing." A hysterical laugh nearly escaped my lips. Was this some kind of prank? A forest ranger trying to scare off illegal campers? But no ranger would be out at this hour, in this weather, just to frighten a lone camper. "Look," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt, "I'm just here for a couple of nights. I'm not doing any harm. If this is a designated camping area." "It is not," the voice interrupted. "Not anymore. Not since what happened." My torch flickered, the beam growing even weaker. I shook it desperately, unwilling to be plunged back into total darkness. "What happened?" I asked, though every instinct screamed at me not to engage, to stay quiet, to somehow make myself invisible. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. My torch gave one final, valiant glow before dying completely, leaving me in absolute darkness once more. Then I heard it, not from outside the tent, but from somewhere in the forest. A scream, distant but clear. A human scream of pure terror that cut off as abruptly as it had begun. I froze, my blood turned into ice in my veins. Had I really heard that? Or was my mind playing cruel tricks? "That happened," said the voice, now directly beside my ear, inside the tent. I scrambled backwards, tangling myself in my sleeping bag, a scream building in my own throat. But before it could escape, a hand, cold and unnaturally large, clamped over my mouth. I could see nothing in the darkness, but I could feel the weight of something looming over me, something that smelled of damp earth and rotting vegetation, something that shouldn't exist. "They came here too," the voice whispered, so close I could feel its cold breath on my cheek. "Pitched their tent right where yours is now. They heard the stories but didn't believe them, thought they were just campfire tales to frighten children." The hand over my mouth prevented me from speaking, but a whimper escaped nonetheless. "The forest has been here for thousands of years," the voice continued, taking on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic quality. "It has seen things you cannot imagine. It has absorbed them, become them, and now it hungers." The pressure on my mouth eased slightly, allowing me to gasp for air. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. A low, rattling sound filled the tent, a chuckle devoid of any human warmth or humor. "Want? The forest doesn't want. It needs. It feeds. And you, like the others before you, have offered yourself willingly." The weight shifted, and I sensed rather than saw the thing move away from me, towards the tent entrance. A faint glow now outlined the tent flap. Moonlight breaking through the clouds, I realized with a surge of desperate hope. If I could just get out of the tent, maybe I could run. "Don't," said the voice, as if reading my thoughts. "Running only makes it exciting." The tent flap was pulled open from the outside, revealing a silhouette against a moonlit clearing. For a brief, merciful moment, all I could make out was what appeared to be a tall, thin man. But as my eyes adjusted, I began to see details that sent fresh waves of terror through me. The figure was indeed tall, impossibly so, its head nearly touching the lowest branches of surrounding trees. Its limbs were too long, too thin, bent at angles that no human joints would allow. And its face, God help me, its face was like bark, twisted into a grotesque approximation of human features, with deep hollows where eyes should be. You see me now, it said, the voice emanating not from the crude mouth-like opening in its face, but from the very air around me. Few do before the end. I should have screamed. I should have fought or fled or done something, anything, to save myself. But I found myself paralyzed, not with fear, though there was plenty of that, but with an unnatural lethargy that seemed to seep into my very bones. It was as if the forest itself was reaching into me, draining my will to resist. The figure extended one of its twisted limbs towards me, elongated fingers unfurling like new fern fronds. Come, it said, the forest is waiting. And God help me, I began to move, not of my own volition, but as if invisible strings were pulling me forward. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, like a poorly manipulated puppet. As I emerged from the tent into the moonlit clearing, I saw that the forest had changed. The trees seemed closer together, their branches reaching down like grasping hands. The ground beneath me pulsed subtly, as if breathing, and the stream, which had been clear and bubbling earlier, now ran black and viscous in the moonlight. The figure, the thing, stood at the edge of the clearing, one arm still extended toward me, beckoning. Behind it, the forest seemed to shift and warp, creating a dark tunnel leading deeper among the trees. A distant part of my mind was screaming, fighting against whatever force was compelling me forward, but it was like trying to wake from a nightmare. The harder I fought, the more firmly I seemed to be in its grip. My legs carried me forward, step by unwilling step, toward the waiting figure. As I drew closer, I could smell it clearly now, a complex odor of decaying leaves, moss, fungi, and something metallic that might have been blood. Why? I managed to gasp, fighting to form even that single word. The thing tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those hollow eye sockets. The forest remembers, it said, remembers the axes and saws, the fires, the poison that seeps into its roots. It remembers and it repays. I was close enough now that I could have reached out and touched it had I control of my own limbs. Instead, my body stopped, swaying slightly like a tree in a gentle breeze. The creature raised its other arm, and I saw that what I had taken for fingers were more like vines or roots, constantly shifting and writhing. They reached towards me, brushing against my face with a touch that was surprisingly gentle. You will feed the forest, it said. Your flesh will nourish the roots. Your blood will water the soil. Your bones will become the forest bones. And perhaps, if you are worthy, you will join us, become part of the watching, the waiting, the hungering. The vines began to wrap around my wrists, my neck, my waist. They were cold and damp, with an unnatural strength that made resistance futile. Not that I could resist. Whatever force had taken control of my body still held me in its grip, but as the creature began to pull me towards that dark tunnel in the trees, something unexpected happened. From somewhere deep in the forest came a sound that didn't belong. The mechanical rumble of an engine. The creature froze. The vines around my body tightened painfully for a moment, then abruptly withdrew. A hiss of what might have been frustration or anger escaped it. Others come, it said, its voice now hurried, less mesmerizing. The forest must wait, but not for long. It began to back away, its form seeming to blur and fragment at the edges, as if it was dissolving into the very air. Remember, it said, its voice already fading. The forest never abandons what belongs to it. You have been marked. You will return. And then it was gone, melting into the darkness between the trees. The unnatural hold on my body released so suddenly that I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath as if I'd been underwater. The sound of the engine grew louder, and headlights appeared between the trees. A vehicle making its way along what must have been a forestry track I hadn't noticed earlier. Relief flooded through me, so intense it was almost painful. I tried to stand, to run towards the approaching vehicle, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The best I could manage was to raise one trembling arm in a plea for help. The vehicle, a Land Rover, I now saw, came to a stop at the edge of clearing. Its headlights illuminated my pathetic form, kneeling in the mud beside my tent. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, momentarily silhouetted against the lights. "Hello?" a human voice called out. "Is someone there? Are you all right?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. My throat felt raw, as if I'd been screaming for hours. The figure approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. As it drew closer, I could make out a forest ranger's uniform. "Good God," the ranger said, kneeling beside me. "What happened to you? Are you injured?" I shook my head, then nodded, then shook it again. I didn't know how to answer. Was I injured? Not physically, perhaps, but something fundamental had been altered within me. As something, I finally managed to stammer. Something in the forest. Not human. It spoke to me. The ranger's expression changed. Concern giving way to understanding. Then to what looked like resignation. "You're the third one this month," he said quietly, helping me to my feet. Always this clearing. Always the same story. My legs threatened to give way beneath me, but the ranger's grip was firm. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've seen it too?" The ranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he guided me toward the Land Rover, his flashlight sweeping the edge of the clearing, as if expecting to see something lurking there. "Halewood Forest is very old," he said eventually, his voice carefully neutral. "Some of these trees were saplings when the Romans first came to Britain. Old places. They developed their own kind of awareness. Some say their own rules." He helped me into the passenger seat of the Land Rover before continuing. "The locals don't come to this part of the forest. Haven't for generations. There are stories, but tourists and campers don't know them or don't believe them. The abandoned campsite," I said, sudden realization dawning. "The boot, the cooking pot, what happened to them? The people who were there before me?" The ranger's face was grim as he started the engine. "Official report says they packed up and left. Happens all the time. People underestimate the wilderness, get spooked by the normal sounds of the forest at night, decide camping isn't for them after all. And unofficially," I pressed, even as a part of me desperately didn't want to know. The ranger put the Land Rover in gear and began to turn around, his eyes fixed on the track ahead. "Unofficially, we never found them. Just their campsite, looking like they'd vanished in the middle of breakfast. No tracks leading away except their own from the day before. Coming in, it was as if the forest had simply swallowed them." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Why isn't this area off limits then? Why aren't there warnings? The ranger sighed. There were, once, signs posted all around this section of forest. No camping. dangerous terrain. Forests closed for ecological recovery. Every one of them was torn down or vandalized within days. And the authorities, well, what could we tell them? That the forest is alive? That it hungers? That it speaks with a human voice sometimes, luring people deeper in? He shook his head. I do what I can. Patrol more frequently when I know there are campers about. Suggest safer spots when I encounter hikers headed this way. But I can't be everywhere at once. We drove in silence for a while, the headlights illuminating the narrow track, branches scraping against the sides of the Land Rover like skeletal fingers. I couldn't stop shivering, despite the vehicle's heater blasting warm air. What did it mean? I finally asked. It said I'd been marked, that I would return. The ranger's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I don't know, he admitted, but I've worked these woods for 23 years, and in all that time, I've never known anyone have such an encounter and walk away unchanged. Changed how? My voice sounded small like a child's. Dreams, mostly, he said. Dreams of the forest, of roots growing beneath your skin, of becoming bark and branch and leaf. He glanced at me briefly. Some fight it, move away, as far from any forest as they can get. Others, they come back, drawn like moths to a flame. They say they can hear it calling them, even hundreds of miles away. And those who come back, what happens to them? The ranger was silent for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the engine's rumble. They joined the forest, he said simply. One day they walk in, and they don't walk out again. We reached the car park, where my car sat alone under the moonlight, exactly as I'd left it. The ranger stopped beside it and turned to look at me properly for the first time. His face was lined and weathered, his eyes holding a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. My advice? Drive away from here. Tonight, as far and as fast as you can. Change your name if possible. Move to a city, concrete and steel, no trees. And if you start dreaming of the forest, if you feel it calling you, resist with everything you have. I nodded numbly, fumbling for my car keys with hands that still trembled. Will that work? I asked, can I escape it? The ranger's smile was sad. I don't know. I truly don't. But it's your only chance. I followed his advice. That very night, I drove straight back to London, stopping only for fuel. I left most of my camping equipment behind. I couldn't bear to touch any of it, knowing it had been in that clearing, possibly contaminated by whatever presence dwelled in those ancient woods. For a few weeks, I thought I might have escaped. I threw myself into work, stayed in my flat with its view of concrete and brick, avoided parks and even houseplants. I told myself it had been a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by isolation and anxiety. But then the dreams began. At first, they were subtle. I would dream of standing in a forest clearing, feeling the cool earth beneath my bare feet, hearing the whisper of leaves above me. Nothing threatening, just a sense of peaceful immersion in nature. But gradually, night by night, the dreams changed. I began to feel roots growing from my feet, anchoring me to the soil. My skin roughened and hardened, taking on the texture of bark. My arms extended upward, fingers splitting and multiplying into twigs and branches. And all the while a voice, that voice, whispered that I was coming home, that I belonged to the forest now, that I would feed it and join it and become it. I would wake gasping, clawing at my skin, expecting to find bark and moss where flesh should be. The relief of finding myself still human would last only until the next night, when the dreams would return more vivid than before. I sought help, of course. Therapists, psychiatrists, sleep specialists. I was diagnosed with PTSD, with sleep paralysis, with various anxiety disorders. The medications they prescribed helped me sleep without dreaming for a while, but the dreams always found a way back in. And worse than the dreams was the calling, the constant, gentle tugging at the core of my being, pulling me north, towards Halewood Forest. Some days it's merely a background sensation, like a faint melody heard from another room. Other days, it's an overwhelming compulsion that leaves me standing at train stations, studying timetables for services heading north, before I catch myself and flee back to my flat. It's been 3 years now. 3 years of resistance. 3 years of knowing, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before the forest patience is rewarded. I've moved twice, changed jobs, even briefly tried living abroad. Nothing helps. The pull remains, and if anything, it grows stronger with each passing month. That's why I'm recording this now, with the rain providing a soothing backdrop to my confession. Not because I found the courage to share my story, but because I finally run out of strength to fight it. Tomorrow, I'm going back to Halewood Forest, back to that clearing by the stream. I've booked a one-way train ticket north. I put my affairs in order, such as they are. This recording, along with a letter explaining my decision in more rational terms to the authorities, will be my only legacy. Perhaps you're listening to this and thinking I'm mad, that I should seek help again, try stronger medications, fight harder against whatever delusion has taken hold of me. Maybe you're right, but you weren't there. You didn't feel the forest's presence, didn't hear its voice, didn't experience its power. You haven't been marked. Would you have lasted longer than I did? Would you still be fighting? Or would you too have eventually surrendered to the inevitable? The rain is easing now. Soon it will stop completely, leaving only silence. The same silence I encountered in that forest clearing 3 years ago. It feels fitting somehow that my story should end as it began. So if you find yourself in the north of England, near a woodland called Halewood Forest, heed this warning. Stay on the marked paths. Don't venture deeper than you can see the sky. And whatever you do, don't camp in the clearing by the stream, because the forest remembers. The forest waits. And the forest is always hungry. Have you ever driven alone at night, on a road you don't know, while the rain hammers against your windscreen, the way the water distorts the headlights of oncoming traffic, turning them into blinding starbursts? The hypnotic rhythm of your wipers sweeping back and forth, as you strain to see the road ahead? I'm sure many of you have experienced this, but I wonder if any of you have had an experience quite like mine. I should have known better than to take that shortcut. That's always how these stories begin, isn't it? A poor decision, a wrong turn, a desperate attempt to save time. But I was exhausted after a 3-day business conference in Sheffield, and the thought of the standard 4-hour drive back to London filled me with dread. When my sat-nav suggested a route that would supposedly shave 40 minutes off my journey, I accepted without hesitation. What a fool I was. The rain started about an hour into my drive. Just a light drizzle at first. Barely enough to warrant using my wipers. But as I turned off the M1 and onto increasingly narrower roads, the heavens truly opened. The kind of torrential downpour that makes you question whether your wipers are working at all. I slowed to a crawl, leaning forward in my seat as if those extra few inches would somehow improve my visibility. The countryside had given way to dense woodland on both sides of the road, the trees forming a dark tunnel that seemed to swallow my car. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom, and the rain created a constantly shifting curtain that played tricks on my eyes. More than once, I thought I saw something moving among the trees, only to blink and find nothing there. I checked my phone, hoping to confirm I was still on the right track, but I had no signal. The sat-nav was still functioning, however. Its artificial voice occasionally instructed me to continue straight for 7 miles, or turn left in 800 yards. I clung to those instructions like a lifeline, trusting the technology to guide me back to civilization. It was around 10 p.m. when I noticed my fuel gauge was getting uncomfortably low. The orange warning light hadn't come on yet, but it was close. According to the sat-nav, the nearest petrol station was 15 miles away, too far for comfort in these conditions. I was contemplating turning back when I spotted a small sign at the side of the road, partially obscured by overhanging branches. It promised fuel just 2 miles ahead. Relief washed over me. I could fill up, perhaps grab a coffee, and continue my journey with renewed energy. 2 miles in this weather would take about 5 minutes. I could manage that. Those 2 miles stretched into what felt like eternity. The road narrowed further and began to wind unpredictably, hairpin turns appearing out of nowhere, forcing me to brake suddenly. The trees pressed closer, their branches occasionally scraping against the roof of my car like skeletal fingers. And the rain, God, the rain was biblical. Sheets of water cascaded down my windscreen faster than my wipers could clear it. Just when I was beginning to think I'd somehow missed a petrol station, I saw lights ahead. They flickered through the rain and darkness, yellow and weak, but unmistakably artificial. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it made me lightheaded. The petrol station was an ancient-looking affair. 2 pumps beneath a sagging canopy that offered little protection from rain. A small shop with fly-speck windows cast a sickly fluorescent glow into the night. No corporate branding. No familiar logos, just a hand-painted sign that read Fletcher's in faded red letters. I pulled up to one of the pumps and cut the engine. The sudden silence was startling, broken only by the drum of rain on the car roof and the tick-tick-tick of my cooling engine. For a moment, I sat there, oddly reluctant to step out into the storm. There was something about this place that felt wrong, too isolated, too forgotten by time. But my fuel gauge didn't care about my misgivings. I pulled my coat over my head and made a dash for the shop, intending to pay before filling up. A bell jangled discordantly as I pushed open the door. The interior was as dated as the exterior, with wood panel walls and linoleum flooring that had worn through in places. A few sad-looking shelves held dusty tins and packets. A refrigerated unit hummed loudly in one corner, containing sandwiches that I wouldn't have fed to a stray dog. Behind a counter stood an elderly man. He was tall and painfully thin, with stooped shoulders and hands that seemed too large for his wiry frame. His face was deeply lined, like cracked leather left too long in the sun, and his eyes, pale blue and watery, seemed to look to me rather than at me. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Pump 1, please." The old man didn't respond immediately. He continued to stare at me with those unsettling eyes, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Nasty night to be on the roads," he said. His voice was surprisingly deep, with a local accent so thick I had to concentrate to understand it, especially these roads. "Yes, well, I'm just passing through," I replied, pulling out my wallet, "heading back to London." "London," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Long way from London, you are. Most folk around here don't go further than Chesterfield in their whole lives." I made a non-committal noise, eager to complete the transaction and get back on the road. "How much for a full tank?" The old man named a price that seemed suspiciously low, but I wasn't about to question it. I handed over my card, which he examined with confusion before reluctantly accepting it. The card machine looked like a relic from the early 2000s, and I held my breath as it processed my payment, half expecting it to decline out of sheer technological incompatibility. As the machine whirred and clicked, the old man continued to stare at me. "You're taking the back road, then?" "Not many do. These days, not since the accidents." A chill that had nothing to do with my damp clothes ran down my spine. "Accidents." He nodded solemnly. "Bad stretch of road. That, especially in weather like this. The bend by Harlow's Creek has claimed more lives than I care to count." The car machine finally spat out a receipt, which he handed to me with those over-large hands. His fingers brushed against mine, cold as clay. "Perhaps," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "perhaps you'd be better off waiting out the storm. I've a room in the back. It's not much, but it's dry." The thought of spending the night in this decrepit establishment with this peculiar old man was enough to override any concerns about the road ahead. "Thank you, but I really should press on," I said firmly. "London won't come to me, after all." The old man's face remained impassive, but I thought I detected a flicker of something in those pale eyes. Disappointment? Concern? Or something else entirely? "As you wish," he said. "But remember what I said about Harlow's Creek. When you come to the covered bridge, slow right down. And whatever you do, don't stop for hitchhikers. Not on this road. Not tonight." I nodded, more to end the conversation than agreement, and hurried back out into the rain. As I filled my tank, I could feel the old man watching me through the window, his gaunt silhouette perfectly still among the flickering lights of the shop. Back in my car, with the doors locked and the engine running, I felt marginally better. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The sat-nav was recalculating my route. Apparently confused by my unplanned stop, I decided to continue following the road I was on. It had to lead somewhere eventually, and any direction seemed preferable to staying near that unsettling petrol station. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rear-view mirror. The old man had emerged from the shop and was standing in the rain, watching my departure. He raised one of those two large hands in what might have been a wave or a warning. I drove perhaps half a mile before realizing I'd made a terrible mistake. The road, bad as it had been before, deteriorated dramatically. Potholes the size of small craters threatened to swallow my tires. The surface was slick with mud washed down from surrounding woodland, and the rain, if anything, had intensified, turning the world beyond my headlights into an impenetrable wall of water. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, concentrating on keeping the car on what passed for a road. The sat-nav had given up entirely, the screen showing only recalculating, before fading to black. I was on my own. The woods pressed closer, the trees now so near the roadside that their branches scraped against my car. In the brief moments when my headlights penetrated the gloom, I could see that these weren't ordinary trees. They were ancient, gnarled things, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost human in their torment. The bark was black with rain and age, and the leaves, what few remained in the autumn weather, were a sickly yellowish color that reminded me of jaundiced skin. Have you ever had that feeling of being watched? Not just observed, but scrutinized, evaluated? That's how I felt as I drove through those woods, as if 1,000 eyes were following my progress, waiting for me to make a mistake. I don't know how long I drove like that, hunched over the wheel, peering into the darkness. Time seemed to lose meaning. The road twisted and turned like a wounded snake, sometimes doubling back on itself so completely that I feared I was going in circles. The only constants were the rain, the darkness, and that unshakable feeling of being watched. And then I saw the bridge. It loomed out of the darkness. So suddenly I nearly missed it. A covered bridge, just as the old man had described, a relic from another century. Its wooden structure black with age and damp. My headlights illuminated the entrance, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the light rather than reflect it. I remember the old man's warning. When you come to the covered bridge, slow right down. I eased my foot off the accelerator, allowing the car to slow to little more than walking pace as it approached the bridge. The sound changed as soon as I entered. The drumming of rain on the car roof was replaced by a hollow echoing as droplets struck the wooden structure above. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom inside, revealing rough-hewn beams overhead and wooden planks beneath my tires that groaned and shifted with my car's weight. I was midway across when my headlights picked out a figure standing at the far end of the bridge. A woman, just standing there in the pouring rain, on a deserted road, in the middle of nowhere. She was wearing what appeared to be a white dress, now translucent with rain and clinging to her slight frame. Her dark hair hung in sodden ropes around a face I couldn't quite make out. One arm was raised, her thumb extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. I remember the old man's second warning. Don't stop for hitchhikers. Not on this road. Not tonight. I had no intention of stopping. In fact, my instinct was to accelerate, to get past this unsettling figure as quickly as possible. But as I drew nearer, something made me slow down even further. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity. Perhaps it was a strange stillness of the woman, the way she stood motionless despite the rain lashing down around her. As my car crept toward her, she turned her head to face me directly. My headlights fully illuminated her features for the first time. God help me. Her face. It wasn't a face at all. Where features should have been was nothing but a smooth, blank expanse of pale skin, interrupted only by a single dark hollow where her right eye should have been, not an empty socket. There was no evidence that an eye had ever existed there, but a perfect circular hole, like a bullet wound, that seemed to go deeper than physically possible. I froze, my foot hovering between the brake and accelerator, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. And in that moment of hesitation, she moved, not the slow, shambling movement you might expect from something so unnatural. She moved with the liquid grace of Predator, covering the distance between us in what seemed like a single stride. Before I could react, she was at my window, her blank face pressed against the glass, that single dark hole somehow fixed on me despite the absence of eyes. I screamed then, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. My foot slammed down on the accelerator, and the car leapt forward with squealed tires on wet wood. I felt a thump as the vehicle made contact with something, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Blind panic drove me forward, out of the covered bridge and back onto the open road. My heart was pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. My hand shook on the steering wheel, and my breath came in short, sharp gasps that fogged the windscreen. I fumbled for controls to clear it, unwilling to take my eyes off the road for even a second. When I finally dared to check my rear view mirror, the bridge had vanished into the darkness behind me. There was no sign of the woman, or whatever she had been. Had I hit her? The thought made my stomach lurch. But a more rational part of my mind argued that no human could have survived being struck by a car at that speed. And whatever I'd seen on that bridge, it certainly hadn't been human. I drove on, pushing my car as fast as I dared on the treacherous road. The rain had eased slightly, enough that I could see a bit further ahead, but the road remained a winding nightmare through dense woodland. I kept expecting to see lights, houses, some sign of civilization. But there was nothing, just the endless trees and the rain and the darkness. And then I heard it, a sound from the backseat of my car, a soft, wet sound, like something damp being dragged across leather. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me not to look, but I couldn't help myself. My eyes flicked to the rear view mirror, adjusting the focus on the back seat. She was there, The woman from the bridge, crammed into the space behind me, her body contorted at impossible angles to fit, her blank face tilted towards me. That single dark hole seemed to expand as I watched, growing larger, deeper, becoming a void that threatened to swallow all light. I screamed again and instinctively jerked the steering wheel, sending the car into a skid. I fought to regain control, but the wet road offered no traction. The car spun once, twice, and then left the road entirely, plunging down a steep embankment. I had a brief, terrifying sensation of weightlessness, and then impact. I must have blacked out. When I came to, the car was on its side at the bottom of the embankment. Rain was pouring in through the shattered driver's side window. My head throbbed, and I could taste blood where I'd bitten my tongue. But I was alive, and I was alone. The back seat was empty, moving carefully, testing for broken bones. I managed to unfasten my seatbelt and climb out through the passenger door, now positioned above me. The rain had finally stopped, and a gibbous moon occasionally peeked through the clouds, providing just enough light to see by. The car was a write-off, its front end wrapped around a tree. My phone, when I checked it, still had no signal. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, with no means of calling for help. The embankment I'd driven off was too steep and slick with mud to climb, especially in my current state. My only option was to follow what appeared to be a shallow stream at the bottom of the ravine, in the hope that it would lead to flatter ground and eventually civilization. So I began to walk, stumbling in the darkness, using the brief appearances of the moon to guide my way. The stream led away from the road, deeper into the woods. I didn't like that, but I had little choice. The alternative was to wait by the wrecked car until daylight, and after what I'd experienced, I couldn't bear the thought of spending hours in darkness in these woods. I had walked perhaps half a mile when I heard splashing behind me, not the gentle gurgle of the stream over stones, but deliberate splashes, as if something was following me through the shallow water. I stopped and listened. The splashing continued for a moment, then ceased abruptly. Whatever was had stopped when I did. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and frightened in the vast darkness of the woods. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the ordinary sounds of the forest at night. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle murmur of a stream. I continued walking, faster now, fighting the urge to run blindly through the darkness. Running would be foolish. I could easily trip on hidden obstacles or lose my way entirely. Better to maintain a steady pace and remain alert. The splashing resumed almost immediately. Closer this time. No longer trying to match my pace, but moving faster, gaining on me. This time I did run. Fear overrode caution, and I splashed headlong through the stream, no longer caring about direction or obstacles. My only thought was to put distance between myself and whatever was pursuing me. I don't know how far I ran. Far enough that my lungs burned and my legs trembled with exhaustion. Far enough that when I finally collapsed on the stream bank, gasping for breath, I could no longer hear anything following me. As I lay there, trying to quiet my breathing enough to listen to pursuit, I became aware of a faint glow in the distance. Not the cold light of the moon, but a warmer, yellower glow that suggested habitation. Lights. A house, perhaps, or a road. Hope surged within me. I picked myself up and moved toward the light, abandoning the stream to cut directly through the woods. The ground rose steadily beneath my feet, and I realized I was climbing out of the ravine, back toward the level of the road. The light grew stronger as I approached, resolving into distinct points that I now recognized as windows. A building of some kind, illuminated from within. As I drew closer still, the structure took shape. A small, isolated building with a sagging canopy out front and a hand-painted sign that I could just make out in the gloom. Fletcher's. My blood ran cold. It was the petrol station. Somehow, after all my desperate flight through the woods, I had circled back to where my nightmare began. I stood frozen at the edge of the tree line, staring at the dilapidated building. It was impossible. I had driven for miles after leaving the petrol station. I had crossed a bridge, crashed my car, walked for what felt like hours. How could I be back here? And yet there it was, exactly as I remembered it. The two ancient pumps, the fly-specked windows of the shop, casting their sickly fluorescent glow into the night. And behind the counter, visible through those windows, the gaunt figure of the old man, watching the darkness as if expecting someone, as if expecting me. I had a choice to make. I could turn back into the woods, try to find another way out, perhaps follow the road in the opposite direction from the one I'd taken earlier. But the thought of re-entering that darkness, of possibly encountering again whatever had been in my car, was unbearable. At least the petrol station offered light, shelter, and another human presence, however unsettling. So I stepped out of the tree line and approached the shop, my squelching footsteps loud in the sudden quiet. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from oversaturated leaves. The bell jangled just as discordantly as before when I pushed open the door. The old man looked up, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of surprise cross his impassive features. It was quickly replaced by something that might have been resignation. "You're back," he said. Not a question. There was an accident," I stammered, suddenly aware how I must look. Soaked, muddy, possibly bleeding from injuries I hadn't yet catalogued. My car went off the road. I need to call for help. The old man shook his head slowly. "No phone here," he said. "Not since the storm of '98 took down the lines. Never saw the need to have them put back up. A mobile, then," I pressed. "Surely you have a mobile phone?" Another slow shake of the head. "No reception out here. Not for miles." I felt despair welling up inside me. Then how am I supposed to get help? I need to get back to London. My voice trailed off as I noticed something. Behind the counter, partially obscured by the old man's thin frame, was a door. It was ajar, revealing a glimpse of a room beyond. A room with wood-paneled walls that seemed oddly familiar. And leaning against the door frame, barely visible, was a pale hand, a woman's hand, long-fingered and delicate, but with an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. The old man followed my gaze. He sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. "I told you not to stop for hitchhikers," he said softly. I backed away until I felt the shop door behind me. "What is this place?" I whispered. "What's happening to me?" The old man studied me with those pale, watery eyes. "You really don't understand yet, do you?" he said, almost gently. "You never made it past the bridge." "What do you mean?" But even as I asked, a terrible suspicion was forming in my mind. "The bridge by Harlow's Creek," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "The one I warned you about. The one where you hit something or something hit you." "No," I said, but my denial lacked conviction. "No, that's not possible." I drove away. I crashed later, but I drove away from the bridge. The old man shook his head sadly. "That's what they all think at first, that they got away. But no one gets away from her, not once she set her sights on them." As if summoned by his words, the pale hand on the door frame moved. The door opened wider, and she stepped into view, the woman from the bridge, the woman from my car. She was still wearing that white dress, still had her dark hair hanging in ropes around her face. But her face was no longer blank. It was my face, not as it was now, but as it would be after weeks beneath the water, bloated, blue-tinged, with fish-eaten hollows where the eyes should be. A corpse's face, wearing my features like an ill-fitting mask. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. I tried to flee, but my limbs wouldn't respond. I could only stand there, paralyzed with a horror that transcended fear as she glided towards me. She takes different forms for different people, the old man was saying, his voice seeming to come from very far away. Shows them what they fear most. For some, it's a loved one they've lost. For others, a childhood terror come to life. For you, he gestured at the approaching figure. Well, you're seeing what's left of yourself, I suppose. This isn't real, I managed to whisper. This can't be real. Real enough, the old man replied. As real as anything on this side of the veil. She was directly in front of me now, close enough that I could smell her, a damp, earthy scent like freshly turned soil mixed with stagnant water. Her cold hand reached up to cup my cheek, and I felt myself falling into those empty sockets where I should have been. You'll learn to accept it, the old man said, his voice growing fainter as darkness closed in around me. They all do, eventually. And then you'll join us, keeping watch over the road, warning travelers who might listen, and waiting for those who won't. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Days, perhaps years. Time moves differently here. Sometimes I'm in the shop of the old man, whose name I've learned is Fletcher, just like the sign. Sometimes I'm at the bridge, feeling the rain that never truly stops, watching headlights approach through the gloom. And sometimes when a traveler is particularly receptive, particularly vulnerable, I find myself sitting beside them in their car, whispering warnings they mistake for their own thoughts. Slow down. Turn back. Don't take this road. Most don't listen. They drive on, toward the bridge, towards her, and afterwards, once she's done with them, they join our company. Our ranks grow with each passing storm. I wonder, as you listen to this, where you are. Are you safe at home? Rain tapping gently on your windows, secure in the knowledge that this is just a story? Or are you perhaps in your car, on a dark road somewhere, the rain hammering against your windscreen as you strain to see the way ahead? If it's the latter, then let me offer you some advice. When the sat-nav suggests a shortcut, ignore it. When you see a petrol station in the middle of nowhere, drive past. And if you come to a covered bridge on a rainy night, with a figure standing at the far end, don't slow down. Don't look too closely. And whatever you do, don't stop. Because once you're on this road, you never truly leave it. And the rain never really stops. Do you ever feel that peculiar sensation of being watched when you're completely alone? That prickling at the back of your neck, the sudden uneasiness that makes you turn around, only to find empty space? I used to dismiss such feelings as mere products of an overactive imagination. Now I know better. Now I understand that sometimes, when you feel eyes upon you in an empty room, it's because something truly is watching. I should explain that I worked as a night security guard at Blackwood Medical Research Facility, a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Bristol. 6 months ago, now, though it feels like a lifetime, the job wasn't particularly demanding. Monitor the security cameras, conduct hourly patrols, log any unusual occurrences. The pay was decent, especially with the night differential, and the solitude suited me. I've never been much for socializing, you see. Always preferred my own company to that of others. The facility itself was relatively new, all gleaming glass and polished steel during the day. But at night, with most of the lights dimmed to conserve energy, it transformed into something altogether different. The long corridors took on an almost submarine quality, the emergency lighting casting everything in a pale greenish glow. The laboratories, with their shrouded equipment and darkened specimen tanks, became chambers of mystery, and the continuous hum of the ventilation system provided a constant, unsettling soundtrack to my shifts. I had been working there for nearly a year without incident. Oh. There were the usual false alarms. A researcher forgetting to properly close a door, cause it to drift open and trigger a sensor, or the occasional power fluctuation during storms. Nothing that warranted more than a notation in the logbook until the night of the rainfall. It had been threatening to rain all day. The sky a uniform leaden gray that never quite delivered on its promise. By the time I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m., the clouds had finally begun to release their burden. It wasn't a dramatic downpour, just a steady, persistent rain that tapped against the facility's many windows like impatient fingers. The handover from the evening guard was routine. Nothing to report, all systems functioning normally. I settled into the security office with a thermos of coffee and a paperback thriller I'd been working through for the past week. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I made my patrols, checked the camera feeds, and returned to my book. It was during my 2 a.m. patrol that I first noticed something amiss. I was on the third floor, the section that housed the more specialized research laboratories. Most of these were kept locked, their contents classified even from security personnel like myself. We were instructed to simply verify that the doors remained secured and the biometric access panels showed no signs of tampering. As I moved down the corridor, I became aware of a sound beneath the omnipresent hum of the ventilation, a rhythmic dripping, like a tap not fully closed. Given the age and condition of the building, pristine though it appeared, I assumed it was exactly that. Perhaps a leaking pipe somewhere in the ceiling or behind one of the walls, made worse by the night's rainfall. I continued my patrol, making a mental note to report the issue to maintenance in the morning. But as I rounded the corner to the next section, the dripping grew louder, more insistent. And now there was something else, a faint, musty smell, like old books left too long in a damp basement. I followed the sound to its source, a door marked Lab 3C, authorized personnel only, unlike the other laboratory doors, which featured digital keypads or biometric scanners. This one had an old-fashioned keyhole in addition to its electronic security. More curious still, a thin line of moisture was seeping out from beneath the door, forming a small puddle on the polished concrete floor. Protocol dictated that I should immediately report any sign of water damage or leakage, regardless of the hour. Water and sensitive electronic equipment don't mix, after all, and the facility housed millions of pounds worth of research technology. I reached for my radio, intending to call it in, when I noticed something odd about the puddle. In the greenish emergency lighting, it didn't look like water. It was too dark, too viscous. I crouched down for a closer inspection, careful not to touch it. The musty smell was stronger here, undercut with something metallic and unpleasant. And as I watched, the puddle seemed to shift. Not like liquid responding to a vibration or a draft, but like something with purpose, with intent. I stood quickly, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. This was well outside my area of expertise. Whatever was leaking from Lab 3C, it wasn't simple rainwater. I backed away, fumbling with my radio, when a new sound stopped me cold. From behind the door came a soft, wet slithering noise, like something large and damp dragging itself across the floor. Then a gentle thud, as if that same something had pressed itself against the inside of the door. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting the sound of my voice in the silent corridor. "Is someone in there?" No response. Just another wet slither, another gentle thud. The door vibrated slightly with the impact. I keyed my radio. "Control, this is Anderson on the third floor patrol. I've got an incident at Lab 3C. Some kind of leak, and possibly an unauthorized person inside. Request immediate assistance." The radio crackled with static for a moment before the night supervisor responded. "Anderson, this is Control. Are you certain about Lab 3C?" That section should be completely unoccupied and secured. I'm standing right outside it now. I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the door. There's definitely something leaking under the door, and I can hear movement inside. A long pause followed, so long that I was about to repeat myself when the supervisor finally responded. Stay where you are. I'm contacting the on-call research director. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to open that door. The seriousness in his voice sent a fresh chill through me. In a year of working at the facility, I'd never heard of anyone contacting the research director after hours. Whatever was happening, it was clearly outside the bounds of normal security concerns. As I waited, the noises within Lab 3C continued. The slithering became more frantic, punctuated by increasingly forceful thuds against the door. The puddle at my feet had grown larger, spreading across the corridor in a sluggish tide that seemed to move independently of the floor's slight incline. And then, most disturbingly, I began to hear what sounded like whispering, not distinct words, but the unmistakable cadence of human speech, rapid and urgent, coming from within the laboratory. Multiple voices, overlapping, rising and falling in a bizarre chorus that made my skin crawl. My radio crackled to life once more. Anderson, Dr. Harlow is on her way. Estimated arrival in 20 minutes. She insists that you maintain your position, but keep at least 2 meters from the door. Do you copy? I copy. I responded, already backing further away. But Control, you should know that the situation is escalating. There are voices coming from inside the lab now. Another lengthy pause before the response. Can you make out what they're saying? I strained to listen. The whispering had taken on a chanting quality. Still unintelligible, but more rhythmic, more purposeful. No, it's not clear, but there must be several people in there. That's not possible, the supervisor replied, his voice tight. Lab 3C has been sealed for the past month. No one has access except Dr. Harlow and the facility director. Before I could respond, a new sound emerged from behind the door. A high, keening wail that started softly but rapidly rose in volume and pitch until I had to cover my ears. It wasn't human, couldn't be human, but conveyed such profound suffering that I felt it like a physical pain in my chest. The puddle at my feet surged suddenly, as if responding to the wail, rippling and swirling in patterns that defied hydraulic logic. And within those ripples, I swear I saw faces, fleeting impressions of agonized human features that formed and dissolved in the space of a heartbeat. I backed further away, my training warring with an instinct for self-preservation that screamed at me to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that door. But I held my ground, remember my duty and the supervisor's explicit instructions to remain in position. The wailing abruptly ceased, replaced by a sound like dozens of fists pounding on the door from inside. The metal buckled slightly with each impact, the electronic security panel flickering, as if experiencing power fluctuations. Whatever security measure protected Lab 3C, they were clearly being tested to their limits. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The pounding, the whispering, even the dripping. An absolute silence fell, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the distant patter of rain against windows. For a moment, I dared to hope that the episode, whatever it had been, was over, that the next 20 minutes would pass uneventfully until Dr. Harlow arrived to take control of the situation. That hope died as I watched the keyhole on the laboratory door. A dark, viscous substance began to seep through it, hanging in a bulbous drop that grew larger by the second. Unlike the liquid on the floor, this moved with undeniable purpose, rotating slightly as if surveying the corridor, and then it extended, stretching itself into a thin tendril that reached toward me with deliberate intent. I scrambled backwards, nearly losing my footing on the slick floor. The tendril continued to extend, impossibly long, impossibly aware. It shouldn't have been able to maintain its form like that, defying gravity and the basic properties of liquid. Yet there it was, reaching for me with the focused determination of a predator. Control. I hissed into my radio, unable to take my eyes off the approaching tendril. The situation is critical. Something is coming through the keyhole. I need to retreat to a safer position. The radio remained silent, whether due to equipment failure or the supervisor being occupied with coordinating Dr. Harlow's arrival. I received no response. I was on my own. I made a decision then, one that likely saved my life but has haunted me ever since. I turned and ran, abandoning my post in direct violation of my orders and my duty. I ran as I've never run before, driven by a primal fear that overrode all rational thought. Behind me, I heard the laboratory door finally give way with a screech of tearing metal. The sound that followed, a wet, massive exhalation, like some enormous lung expelling breath for the first time, propelled me even faster along the corridor toward the stairwell. I didn't look back. Some instinct told me that to see what had emerged from Lab 3C would be to invite madness. Instead, I focused on escape, taking the stairs 3 at a time in my desperation to put distance between myself and whatever horror now roamed the 3rd floor. I reached the security office on the ground floor, gasping for breath, my uniform soaked with sweat. The supervisor looked up from the monitor bank, his face pale. "Anderson, what the hell are you doing here? You were ordered to remain in position." Something came through the door. I managed between gulps of air, or it was coming through. I couldn't stay there. It was reaching for me. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from anger to something that might have been fear. "What exactly did you see?" Before I could answer, the facility's alarm system activated a wail that perfectly echoed the sound I'd heard in the corridor. Red emergency lights began to strobe, and the automated security system announced in its calm, feminine voice, "Containment breach detected. Emergency protocols activated. All personnel evacuate immediately. Repeat, all personnel evacuate immediately." The supervisor's radio crackled to life. "Control, this is Dr. Harlow. I'm just entering the parking lot. What's the situation?" He snatched up the radio. "Doctor, we have a confirmed breach in Lab 3C. The specimen is loose in the facility. Anderson reports direct contact." Direct contact? What did that mean? I hadn't touched the substance, merely fled from it. But before I could clarify, Dr. Harlow's response came through, her voice sharp with urgency. "Lock down the entire 3rd floor. Activate the UV flood protocol and seal all ventilation ducts. And quarantine anyone who's been exposed, especially your guard. Don't let him leave the building under any circumstances." The supervisor looked at me with new eyes, wary, calculating eyes that made my heart sink. "Understood, Doctor. Anderson is with me now. I'll secure him in the containment anteroom until you arrive." Secure me? I took an involuntary step back, suddenly aware that I was in danger not just from whatever had escaped Lab 3C, but from the facility's own protocols. "What's going on?" I demanded. What was in that laboratory? The supervisor didn't answer directly. Instead, he moved to a security panel I'd never seen used, inserted a key, and entered a complex code. Steel shutters began to descend over all windows and external doors, sealing the facility more completely than a standard lockdown. "I need you to come with me, Anderson," he said, drawing a taser from beneath the desk. "Another deviation from standard security protocol. Dr. Harlow will explain everything, but right now, I need to get you to quarantine. I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me what's happening." I insisted, continuing to back away. What was that thing? And why do I need to be quarantined? The supervisor sighed, a sound of genuine regret. "It's not a thing, Anderson. Not exactly. And if you've been exposed, if it made contact with you in any way, then you're already changing. You just don't know it yet. Changing? The word sent a wave of cold fear through me. I glanced down at my uniform, at the damp patches I'd attributed to sweat, in the red emergency lighting. They appeared darker, more viscous than normal perspiration should be. A terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. What exactly does Blackwood research here? I asked, though I was increasingly certain I didn't want to know the answer. That's classified. The supervisor replied automatically, then seemed to reconsider. But given the circumstances, the third floor houses the Xenobiological Research Division. Specifically, Lab 3C contains a specimen recovered from a meteorite that landed in the Welsh countryside 2 years ago. A specimen that demonstrates remarkable adaptive and mimetic capabilities. Mimetic, the word echoed in my mind, alongside half-remembered articles about organisms that could imitate other life forms. But surely he couldn't be suggesting. It absorbs and replaces. The supervisor continued, as if reading my thoughts. Perfectly, down to the cellular level. We've been studying it under strict containment protocols, trying to understand its potential applications. But if it's loose, if it's had any contact with you, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were horrifyingly clear. If this organism could replace what it absorbed, and if it had somehow made contact with me during my flight from the third floor, I looked down again at the damp patches on my uniform. Were they spreading? I couldn't tell in the pulsing red emergency lights. But I could feel something now, a tingling sensation wherever the moisture touched my skin. And the whispering I'd heard in the corridor seemed to be starting again, faint but growing louder. Only now it was coming from inside my own head. I need help, I said, my voice cracking with fear. Please, whatever this is, help me. The supervisor's expression softened slightly. That's what I'm trying to do. The quarantine room has equipment that can scan for contamination, begin treatment if necessary. But we need to hurry. I wanted to believe him. Part of me knew that quarantine was indeed the safest option for myself and for others. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the second, whispered that I shouldn't trust him, that I should flee, get as far away from the facility as possible. Were these my own thoughts or something else's? I couldn't tell anymore. Anderson, the supervisor said, taking a cautious step toward me, taser raised. I need you to come with me now. Don't make this difficult. It was the taser that decided me. If they truly wanted to help, why the weapon? No, they want to contain me, study me, perhaps destroy me if the contamination was too advanced. And suddenly, with a clarity that felt like breaking through a fog, I knew I couldn't allow that. I lunged for the emergency exit. The supervisor fired the taser, but I was already moving, driven by a new strength and speed that should have alarmed me but instead felt exhilarating. The barbs missed, embedding themselves in the wall beside me. The emergency door should have been sealed by the lockdown, but as I approached, the electronic lock disengaged with a soft click, as if the security system itself were conspiring to aid my escape. I burst out into the rain-soaked night, the facility's alarms fading behind me as I ran across the parking lot toward the surrounding woods. The rain felt wonderful on my skin, washing away the last of my doubts and fears. The whispering in my head had resolved into clear, comforting voices, assuring me that everything was as it should be, that I was becoming something greater, something beyond my former limited existence. I paused at the edge of the woods, turning back for one last look at the facility. Through the rain, I could see figures emerging from the main entrance. The supervisor, a woman who must have been Dr. Harlow, and several security personnel I didn't recognize. They scanned the darkness, flashlight beams cutting through the downpour, searching for me. They wouldn't find me. Already I could feel my body changing, adapting to its new circumstances. The rain no longer felt cold, merely refreshing. The darkness wasn't an obstacle, but a welcoming embrace. And the voices in my head spoke of others like me, waiting in the woods, in the streams, in the soil itself. I am not alone. We are not alone. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've lived in the shadows, watching as Blackwood Medical Research Facility attempted to contain what they still don't realize is uncontainable. They issued a statement about my disappearance, claiming I suffered a psychotic episode and fled. They've searched the surrounding countryside extensively, but found no trace of me. They won't. What I am now doesn't leave traces. I've learned much in these months. About what I've become, about what we are. The specimen in Lab 3. C wasn't the first of its kind to reach Earth. Others have been here for centuries, millennia perhaps, waiting patiently, spreading slowly, adapting. The rain carries us. The rivers and streams distribute us. We seep into the soil, into the groundwater, into the very foundations of human civilization. And on nights like tonight, when the rain falls steadily and the barrier between worlds grows thin, we reach out. We touch those who might be receptive, those who might understand, those who might join us willingly. That's why I'm telling you this now. I can sense your curiosity, your openness to possibilities beyond the mundane. I can feel your connection to us, however faint it might be at present. Listen closely. Can you hear it? Under the patter of rain against your window, under the ordinary sounds of your home. Can you hear the whispering? It's calling to you, just as it called to me. And if you feel that prickling sensation at the back of your neck right now, that sense of being watched even though you're quite alone, well, perhaps you aren't as alone as you believe. We are patient. We will wait until you're ready, until the next rainfall or the one after that, until you find yourself walking home in a downpour without an umbrella, the rain soaking through your clothes to the skin beneath, or until you absent-mindedly touch a damp surface, a rain-slick handrail perhaps, or the wet pages of a book left out in the rain. Such simple moments of contact, such profound transformations that follow. For now, though, simply be aware, when next you feel the rain on your face, let it linger a moment longer than necessary. When you notice a strange puddle that seems to shift against the flow of gravity, pause to examine it more closely. When you hear whispering in an empty room, listen to what it might be telling you. We are the rain. We are the damp earth after the storm. We are the condensation on your window and the mist that rises from the river at dawn. And soon, perhaps we will be you. Sleep well tonight, with the rain tapping gently against your window. Dream of water, of transformation, of release from the confines of your limited existence. We'll be waiting. We'll be watching. And when you're ready, we'll be welcoming you home.